Welcome back to our definitive list of automotive failures. Today, we're exposing 20 more cars that you should avoid at all costs. These are the vehicles that were plagued by terrible designs, catastrophic reliability, and some of the worst engineering decisions ever made. Let's dive into the list. First up, a car that perfectly defines the word forgettable. The Chevrolet Corsica. This was General Motors' attempt at a budget-friendly mid-size sedan in the late 80s and 90s, and it had all the excitement of a filing cabinet. The design was relentlessly bland, the interior was a sea of cheap plastic, and the base engines felt incredibly weak. While GM sold millions of them, most went to rental companies and corporate fleets. The Corsica wasn't necessarily a terrible car, but it was so uninspired and mediocre that when it was finally replaced, absolutely no one noticed. Next, we have a car that was doomed from the moment it arrived on US shores. The Daewoo Leganza. In the late 90s, Korean brand Daewoo tried to break into the American market, but the Leganza showed they just weren't ready. The build quality was shockingly poor, with an interior that felt like it would crack if you looked at it the wrong way. The suspension was overly soft, making the car feel unstable and disconnected from the road. But the real issue was reliability, or the complete lack of it. To make matters worse, Daewoo went bankrupt shortly after, leaving owners with no dealer support for repairs. From a failed import to a failed experiment by a domestic giant, let's talk about the Honda Crosstour. Honda tried to blend a sedan with an SUV, creating a vehicle that nobody was asking for. Based on the excellent Accord, the Crosstour's bizarre, sloped rear end destroyed its practicality, offering less cargo space than the wagon it was meant to replace. It was heavier, clumsier, and less efficient than both the Accord and the CR-V. The Crosstour remains a confusing and forgettable misstep from a brand that usually gets things right. Now for a car that tried to be luxurious but couldn't hide its cheap origins, the Lincoln Versailles. In the late 70s, Lincoln needed a competitor for the Cadillac Seville. Instead of designing a new car, they took a humble Ford Granada, added a different grille and some wood trim, and slapped a massive price tag on it. Buyers weren't fooled. The car was powered by a V8 that only made a pathetic 133 horsepower, the ride wasn't particularly luxurious, and the back seat was cramped. The Versailles was a lazy, cynical attempt at a luxury car, and it failed spectacularly. Speaking of lazy, let's look at the 9th-generation Chevrolet Malibu. Once a respected family sedan, this version felt like an afterthought. The base engine was underpowered, the transmission was sluggish, and the interior was filled with cheap plastics that felt years behind the competition. While rivals like Honda and Toyota were innovating, the Malibu felt stuck in the past, a bland and uninspired option in a competitive market. It was a clear sign that Chevrolet had stopped trying with its mid-size sedan. From a car that felt cheap to one that was legendary for falling apart, we have the Dodge Aspen. This mid-size sedan from the 70s was a quality control nightmare. It was notorious for rusting so quickly that some models had holes in the body within just a few years of rolling off the assembly line. On top of that, it suffered from constant transmission failures, suspension issues, and doors that wouldn't shut properly. The Aspen was subjected to over 1 million recalls, making it one of the most recalled cars in history and a rolling monument to 1970s American manufacturing problems. Next up is an attempt at a compact car that missed the mark in every way: the Dodge Dart. Reviving a classic nameplate, Dodge based this car on an Alfa Romeo platform, hoping to inject some European driving fun. It didn't work. The base engines were weak, the interior felt cheap, and reliability was a disaster. Owners reported stalling engines, electrical gremlins, and faulty transmissions. The Dart failed to capture the hearts of either budget-conscious buyers or enthusiasts, and Dodge quietly discontinued it after just a few years. From an American car with Italian roots, we go to a British car with Japanese roots that somehow got everything wrong. This is the Sterling 825. This car was a partnership between Britain's Rover and Honda, based on the superb Acura Legend. It should have been a hit. But while the Honda V6 engine was reliable, everything else built by Rover was a catastrophe. The electronics were a nightmare, interior trim pieces would fall off, and the build quality was abysmal. It was a luxury car that felt cheaper than an economy car, and the brand quickly vanished from the US market. Now for a car that tried to be a sporty alternative but was just a cheap sedan in disguise: the Dodge Dynasty. Built to appeal to an older generation of buyers, its boxy styling and soft, floaty suspension felt outdated from the day it launched. The engines were underwhelming, especially the base four-cylinder, which struggled to move the heavy car. The Dynasty was a bland, uninspired vehicle that represented the worst of late 80s automotive design. It was a car that simply existed, leaving no impact whatsoever. Next, a car whose name is now synonymous with ugly, the Pontiac Aztek. This SUV is legendary for its disastrous design. It looked like it was designed by three separate teams who were never allowed to speak to each other. With its chunky plastic cladding and bizarre proportions, it was an eyesore from every angle. The performance was equally underwhelming, and while it had some clever features like a built-in cooler, no amount of gimmicks could save it from its looks. The Aztek was a bold idea that was executed horribly. From one of the ugliest cars ever made, we moved to one of the blandest, the Ford Tempo. The Tempo was Ford's idea of a modern fuel-efficient sedan in the 80s and 90s, but it was the definition of automotive mediocrity. The base engine made a miserable 90 horsepower, making it dangerously slow. The styling was utterly forgettable, and the handling was vague and sloppy. The Tempo was basic transportation and nothing more, a car for people who had completely given up on enjoying driving. Let's follow that up with a car that tried to bring luxury to the masses but failed: the Hyundai XG350. Before Hyundai created the successful Genesis brand, they gave us this awkward attempt at a luxury sedan. While it was packed with features for the price, the driving experience was dull and disconnected. The suspension was too soft, the steering was numb, and the build quality just wasn't there. Reliability was also a major issue, with frequent transmission and electrical problems that solidified its reputation as a poor man's luxury car that wasn't worth the savings. From a brand that was trying to move upmarket, we go to one that was on its way out. Here is the Mitsubishi Galant. In the 2000s, while the Camry and Accord were constantly improving, the Galant felt like a car stuck in time. The engines were underpowered, the interior was full of hard plastics, and the design was forgettable. Mitsubishi put almost no effort into keeping the Galant competitive, and as a result, it faded into total irrelevance. By the time it was discontinued, hardly anyone noticed it was gone. Now for a car so bad it became a legendary failure of bad engineering. The Cadillac Cimarron. In a desperate attempt to compete with small European luxury cars, Cadillac took a bottom-of-the-barrel Chevrolet Cavalier, added some cheap leather and a Cadillac grille, and had the nerve to charge a premium price. It was powered by a pathetic 88 horsepower engine and fooled absolutely no one. The Cimarron is remembered as one of the most cynical and embarrassing moments in GM's history. Next up, another Chrysler product that became a rolling punchline: the PT Cruiser. This retro-styled wagon was a huge hit when it first launched, but the charm quickly faded. Underneath its unique body was a slow, inefficient, and horribly unreliable car. The engine was weak, the handling was poor, and they were plagued by a host of mechanical and electrical issues. Once a style icon, the PT Cruiser is now remembered as a poorly built car that aged terribly. From a brand known for taking risks, we go to a brand known for being sensible that made a huge mistake. This is the Suzuki Verona. Suzuki tried to take on the giants of the mid-size sedan market, and the Verona was their weapon of choice. It was a total failure. The engine was an inline-six that somehow only produced 155 horsepower, making it incredibly sluggish. The interior was full of cheap materials, the handling was uninspired, and reliability was awful. The Verona was a forgettable sedan from a brand that was already struggling in the US. Let's move to another car that simply didn't need to exist: the Lincoln Zephyr, later renamed the MKZ. This was essentially a Ford Fusion with a different grille and a higher price tag. It lacked the true luxury, performance, and refinement that buyers expected from a Lincoln. The ride was soft but uninspired, and the interior was filled with materials you'd find in a Ford. It was a half-hearted attempt at luxury that failed to convince buyers to spend the extra money. Next up is one of the most infamous rental car specials of all time: the Chrysler Sebring. This car was an embarrassment to the mid-size sedan class. Its design was awkward, but the real horror was the interior. It was filled with some of the cheapest, hardest, and most unpleasant plastics ever put in a car. The driving experience was just as bad, with weak engines and poor reliability. The Sebring became a joke, a car that nobody bought with their own money, and it permanently damaged Chrysler's reputation in the sedan market. From one Jeep embarrassment to another, let's look at the first-generation Jeep Compass. While the new Compass is a decent vehicle, the original was an automotive disaster. It was based on a cheap front-wheel drive car platform and had none of the off-road capability that the Jeep brand is famous for. It was slow, saddled with a terrible CVT transmission, and had a cheap, noisy interior. It was a Jeep in name only, a cynical attempt to cash in on the brand's reputation without delivering any of the substance. Finally, a car that proves that even bizarre styling can't save a bad car. The Nissan Juke. With its strange bug-eyed look, the Juke was certainly unique. But beyond the weird design was a deeply impractical car. The rear seats were cramped, cargo space was almost non-existent, and the tiny windows made it feel claustrophobic. On top of that, it used Nissan's notoriously unreliable CVT transmission, which was prone to early and expensive failure. The Juke was a weird, compromised vehicle that was all style and no substance. Which of these cars do you think was the biggest failure? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the last part, where we'll expose even more cars you should never, ever buy. See you next time.